All right, welcome to part two of the SpecPoVerse inaugural issue poetry readings. I'm your host, Miguel Mitchell. I'm editor-in-chief and co-founder of SpecPoVerse, an international journal of speculative poetry. SpecPoVerse has been a labor of love for me, bringing together the international voices of poets writing verse within the speculative poetry realm. However, what is speculative poetry? So I want to give you a comprehensive definition created by award-winning poet Khoa Leslie Hope. Speculative poetry is the primordial verse, the first verse, the poetry of possibilities. Our earliest recorded literature is speculative poetry. Gilgamesh, Ramayana, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and Beowulf, for example. Speculative poetry's engagements include aliens, alternate history, cryptids, cyberfunk, cyberpunk, dystopia, fairy tales, fabulism, fantasy, folklore, futurism, horror, magic, monsters, mythology, occult, paranormal, post-apocalyptic, robots, science fiction, shifters, slipstream, solar punk, space opera, steampunk, steampunk, superheroes, supernatural, sword and sorcery, sword and soul, time travel, and weird. All poetic forms and sci-fi coup are welcome. So our first poet today is LindaAnn LoSchiavo. Did I get that last name right?
Yes.
Okay. A native New Yorker and award winner, LindaAnn LoSchiavo is a member of British Fantasy Society, HWA, the Hard Writers of America, SFPA, the Science Fiction and Fantasy Poetry Association, and the Dramatists Guild. She has published titles in 2024 of Always Haunted, Halloween Poems from Wild Ink, Apprentice to the Night from Universe Press, and Félinés d'Essai, Poems about Suicide from Ukivoto. I don't know if that's correct. Is that correct?
Yukioto.
Yukioto, sorry.
Japanese name, yeah.
Okay, Yukioto. And her new releases for 2025 are Cancer Courts My Mother from Prolific Pulse Press, November 2025, and Vampire Verses from Twisted Dreams Press, October 2025. Her book accolades earned include the Elgin Award for A Root Obscure and Lonely, which you should all get, and the Chrysalis Brew Projects Award for Excellence and Reader's Choice Award for Always Haunted Halloween Poems, and the Spotlights Story Award from Spotlights Magazine for Apprentice to the Night. Her website is vampireventurespoems.com, and you can also find her on Blue Sky at ghostlyverse.bsky.social. So welcome, and you may begin, LindaAnn.
Hello, Miguel. I'm so pleased to be reading with all of you, meeting Amelia for the first time, and Engo, is that how you pronounce your name?
Yes, it's Khoa. Yes, so it sounds similar to a ko and a Khoa.
Okoa, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Lovely to meet you.
Thank you.
Yes.
And my poem is called A Haint in the Hollow. And I just want to make sure everybody raise your hand if you don't know what a haint is. Okay, so, oh, you don't? Okay, okay. A haint is a ghost or an evil spirit in Southern folklore. And it's derived from the word haunt. And you will see a lot of houses in the South, Alabama, whatever they call Dixie, South Carolina, painted a color called haint blue. And this is to ward off evil spirits. And my poem is called A Haint in the Hollow. It's a persona poem, and you will be able to tell who really is, whose voice this really is. Perhaps you've heard the tale elders pass on. That haunted spot exists. Brown stains of blood still visible if you know where to look. Don't pursue injustice you can't unsee. A mouth stretched open and a silenced scream. Rebellion with its key-shaped teeth unsealed my memories. My traumas echoing, reverberating, merge to hex this place, which can't erase the horrors I endured. A tapestry of red rage lurks in weeds. Your fearful feet amuse me, passerby. Thank you for listening.
Wonderful. All right, so I have some questions.
Yes.
First, let me ask you how you chose your title. So I know you've defined a haint for everyone who didn't know, but there's also the word hollow. And in a geographical context, that's a small, narrow, sheltered valley, often between mountains or ridges. But you could also read it as an emptiness or a place of loss. So how did you choose this title?
Well, it also plays on the word hallow, which is saint.
Ah,
Giving the ghost who has been abused on a plantation and is now there to remind people that you put me here as a restless person, and now I am going to come back and haunt you and remind you what you did to me. So it's playing on the geographical aspect as you picked up, of course.
mhm.
Because you're in Maryland. Is that considered the South? I guess that's mid-Atlantic, right?
It's half, yes, sort of, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But
Hmm.
when I announced it on Blue Sky, not the whole poem, but that this poem had been accepted, and I just put the title. A lot of British people had never heard of Haint,
Hmm.
and they were not sure what hollow meant either because they thought of emptiness.
Right.
Right. So very interesting to make people focus on the title because they don't know what it is. It's kind of a disruptive act to make
Hmm.
people focus on it as opposed to a plain title like Cancer Court's My Mother, which
Right, right.
you pretty much know what that means. But the whole the whole idea of playing a persona came to me because there are these marvelous Black women who have been going around reclaiming Black cemeteries where slaves were buried that have fallen into derelict provinces. And, obviously no one visits because there's no one either alive there anymore or no one has people have moved to the north or other precincts and so forth. And I thought the idea of the host of a ghost coming back and prevailing over the plantation where where the person was unfairly abused would make for an interesting persona poem.
Yes, absolutely. That's great. So one of the things I found, one of the lines I have in here, which I was curious about, a mouth stretched open in a silenced scream. Now, you use the active silenced instead of the passive silent, and that really hit me in the gut. So, what drove you to that word selection?
Well, obviously the abuse of slavery, and I think it's even more important to write these poems now that we have an administration who's trying to erase Black history
Mhm.
in order to feel better about itself and whitewash the whole thing. It's important to realize how people were traumatized. You know,
Right.
the I was reading old censuses from 1840 from New York, the blocks where I live and so forth. And because slaves were on plantation, they also learned to be expert horsemen.
Right.
So when they came to New York, they were given the most important job in the household, and that was the driver, as well as the coachman and the person who took care of the horses, which were a very expensive property that the landlord owned. And these were exclusively Black people in Greenwich Village.
Hmm.
Interesting, right?
Hmm. Yes, it is.
Entrusted to take care of the horse, take care of the horse's shoes, the maintenance of the carriage and everything. So they had a very high salary in townhouses. People either had their own horse walkway or they parked it in a garage that was very local. And these people were held in high esteem and, given privileges. They were much more important, for example, than the cook or the person who opened the door, and so forth. So it's really interesting. As you know, New York has the African American cemetery,
Right.
African American burial grounds. So when I heard about these women who were the caretakers of these derelict slave graveyards, and they're doing it for free, they're doing it unpaid. They might take donations now that you can have Indiegogo and other forms of fundraising online. But even before that existed, they just felt this is important. It's important how we remember and memorialize our history. So
Absolutely.
it's a history poem.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the lines I really liked, I was really evocative for me, is rebellion with its key-shaped teeth unsealed.
Thank you.
Could you, could you, I don't want to talk so much about how would I feel about it. Could you talk to me about how you came across, invented that line?
Well, the key opens.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the idea that not that the slaves have key-shaped teeth, but rebellion does. Rebellion refuses to stay quiet. We hear about rebel yell. In a
Mm-hmm.
way, this whole poem is a rebel yell, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So the idea that key-shaped teeth on rebellion, and rebellion you think of as a very sharp word. Rebellion is not going to just overlook your flaws. Rebellion is going to cause you to be accountable for the menace and the trauma you've inflicted, because we continue to inflict trauma if we're not actively working against this administration.
Mm-hmm. Right. A lot of times people have difficulty ending their poems. Sometimes their poems end in a way which uh, will confuse the reader, or it will take them someplace else than the poet might have wanted. But you eliminate the distance between the reader and the narrator. You
Thank you.
transported us right to where they are. Your
Thank you.
fearful feet amuse me, passerby. It's like, okay, whoa, I'm right there. Crap, why am I doing right next to this haunted spot? So I really appreciated that. Was that always your goal, or was that just something that just came to you that your muse just said, "Hey, let's end it this way"?
Well, I started writing as a playwright.
Ah,
I grew up in New York, and from the age of 4, I had seen a lot of theater, and my family never took me to children's theater. I saw all the raw things on Broadway. It was not fairy tale theater. And I had my first play on stage in New York when I was 9 years old, and it ran for several months. It was
well,
a
that's
cast of
fantastic.
5 girls. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So the idea of writing a persona poem comes from being a dramatist, because every line you write in a play, you're writing it for a persona. You're writing it for the mother or the girlfriend or, the abused orphan. So writing dramatic monologues comes very natural to me, and I write a lot of them.
Well, that's great, and that's definitely helpful. So you probably have many poems where you have a narrator and using the second person pulling in the reader. Then
Yes, yes. In
that's
fact, in
great.
fact, I sent you one. I sent you a werewolf poem about the
Yes.
werewolves in St. Lucia, and I have written a whole collection of werewolf poems about social injustice, because my book, Always Haunted Halloween Poems, is really a book about social injustice wearing a trick-or-treat costume. So to
Hmm.
get people to read poems about social injustice, you really trick them and say it's a Halloween book. Well, yes, but those crimes take place on Halloween.
Yes, indeed. Yes, they do.
So the whole
Mm.
thing about the werewolf really interested me, that Derek Walcott, the famous poet who was born in St. Lucia, actually was writing about the loup-garou, which is
Hmm.
the French word to say werewolf. And
Werewolf, yes.
yeah, people don't think of poets of the stature of Derek Walcott writing SpecPoVerse, right?
Hmm.
But there he is. So he motivated me to think about the werewolf poem that I sent you. And you notice there's a whole thing about, well, how do people feel about my skin?
Right.
Right?
Right, absolutely. And it's funny that people don't realize that the werewolf is a very important um, folklore figure within, particularly within within France, within Paris, because there is a werewolf of Paris.
Yes. Yes.
And I didn't realize that until I became an adult. I didn't know that that was true. So yeah, it's really fascinating. We think sometimes within our American popular culture that we almost invented some of these popularized monsters, but we didn't.
Yeah,
We didn't invent them.
they came from Europe, they came from
Yeah.
Eastern Europe, but they were known under different names, like
Yes.
Loup-Garou, right?
Yes.
Right.
Well, thank you so much, LindaAnn. It was really, really wonderful.
Thank you for putting together this spectacular thing. We got the background, everything. We got the Zoom reading. Many kisses to you. Well,
Thank you so much. All right. Well, our next poet is Gobin An Khoa. I don't know if I said that. Did I say that okay?
That is okay. Thank you.
Okay. He is a teacher of English in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. In his free time, he enjoys reading fiction and writing speculative poems, some of which have appeared in Weird Book, Starline, Spectral Realms, Eye of the Telescope, and other venues. And you may read your poem.
Yeah, right. Thank you. And I very appreciate the chance to be here. And it is one of the very few time I actually get to read my poems aloud. So I'm not exactly experienced in this. So I hope you will enjoy my reading. And the poem I'm reading today is a Noctilucent Symphony based on based on the legend of the nine-tailed fox, but also mostly comes from my imagination. Right. So, a crimson fox trots through the ancient woods where moonlight casts its threads of silvery sheen that interlace with patches of dark shades. Its voice stirs up the slumberous earthbound souls which wakened, woven by the slanting beams, and, bowing to the strange and watchful fox, in chorus hum into the hastening wind, arousing murmurs from the shaking leaves, once voiceless, faceless. They reclaim their miens, refashioned from their lingering memories. Once nobles mingle with past commoners, past peasants gathered with once royalties, unburdened by all shackles worn in life. The chains of status, cuffs of wealth, along with nooses of achievements, thrust upon mankind by mankind, rendered meaningless. The spirits float, as free as air, as fair as death, equal beneath the mirrored moon, as they dance to the tunes of earth and sky, squeezed in the cleansing grace bestowed on them. These souls, forgotten, with no mourners left, sway to the symphony they alone can hear, and witnessed by the fox's fathomless eyes, which etch each visage in the creature's mind. The fox stands up amid the spectral train, its lustrous tail then moving to its splits, now one, now two. Before long, nine emerge, each tip illumined by a wisp of light. A passing gust presents it with a leaf, a natural flute, when he held it against its mouth. A quiet breath breathes life into a note from which a tender melody pours out. The music fills the woodland, beckoning the wending river and lurking beasts beside a rustling jeweled place across to join this most ethereal orchestra. Somewhere, the bubbling croaks of frogs chimed in, mixed with the raven's calls and squirrels' squeaks, while suppless serpents' hisses lowly ring, commingling with the wolf's fierce soaring howls. The fox's flute then sets a fervent pace, as note upon note pierce the dimming plain, and fireflies, drawn to the enchanted sounds, adorn the woodland with their golden clothes. The spirits, basking in the merging gleams, shed all attachments to their earthly cage, and soon the song becomes a lullaby till every noise slows to a sobering end. The spirits, after one last solemn bow, fused with the winds that blow to realms unknown. The birds and beasts depart, the bugs disperse, and silence once more shrouds this shadowed land. Wrapped in the warmed webs woven by the sun, the emerald leaves hang listless on their boughs. In the still grass, a lonesome bushy tail fades midst the shades, untouched by worldly light. Right, and that concludes my poem. Thank you so much for your listening.
Thank you so much. Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
The musicality of your
Yes.
verse, it's really great.
Yes.
So your poem tells a supernatural tale so beautifully, and you use quatrains and iambic pentameter.
Yes.
So why did you choose this form?
Right. Growing up in Vietnam, yes, most of our poetry contains a certain amount of musicality, and this quatrain is very commonly seen in Vietnamese poetry, along with the rhythm and the rhyme. So I suppose I was just tapping into my Vietnamese root and just writing what I was most familiar with and using the quatrain. Yes, it's easier for me to visualize and it's easier for me to arrange my ideas. And drawing from my experience writing in English, I choose the iambic pentameter because I'm also used to writing in that meter as well.
Mhm.
It's
That's
familiar.
that's great.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, and there's just the sound when you start. You can hear you're in the midst of the forest. You can hear everything that you're describing. The
Yeah.
is this the hissing and it just becomes very clear in your mind. It's really good.
Yeah. So thank you.
So you talked about the nine-tailed fox, which is of
Yeah.
course part of a non-Western folklore.
Yes.
So what is the importance of invoking this entity in your poem?
Right. The nighttime fox is a very prominent figure, creature in Asian culture. I know many Asian cultures feature the nighttime foxes in their stories. Right. We have the nighttime foxes in China, in South Korea, in Japan, and of course in Vietnam, we also have that. But the majority of the tales that I've read and also their let's just say modern appearances the nine-tailed fox are usually considered some sort of malevolent forces. Yes,
Hmm.
they they trained for 1,000 years. They assumed the form of a human in order to do some shady deeds. But in some tales, like in some legends in Vietnam, the nine-tailed fox was actually presented as some sort of a protective or benevolent creature, at least in one legend. Right. So in Vietnam, there was a legend when a king was running away from the invading forces because the king's army was too weak to stand up against the invaders. Right. He found the body of a young girl and he gave her a makeshift grave. So he prayed to that girl's body and saying that if you'd protect me and let it help me survive this ordeal, I will forever honor you. So the invading forces they almost found the king in hiding, but then there was a fox that came out of the bushes and lured the hunting dogs away. So effectively saving the
Hmm.
king. Right. So afterwards, the king actually honored his promise. He visited the grave of that unnamed girl and he gave her a formal title and he gave her a statue, a grave, a proper burial. And that was one of the very rare instances in legends where a fox, a spiritual or supernatural fox-like creature, was considered to be a benevolent protector, a
Hmm.
guardian. Yes. And I know in
Wow.
Japan, yes, it's in Japan also. I do believe they also have the statues of the yeah dog-like guardians, the Inari statues, which also shows fox-like or canine spirits being
Mhm.
protected or being able to bless the people who let's just say respect or honor them.
Hmm.
So
Well, that's interesting how the canine spirit is represented in certain Asian cultures, and then we have the coyote represented in certain Native American
Yeah,
cultures as the trickster god, but also sometimes helpful. So
yeah.
it's wow. So that's really interesting how it's just crossing, I mean, but just by different representations.
Yes, I
Still
like that as
canine.
well. Yeah, I love canines. Yes.
Well, thank you so much. That was wonderful.
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, our next poet is Amelia Weissman. Amelia is a mom of six with her master's in marine biology. She is published as a scientific writer in research journals and as a fiction writer in Stalwart's Shadows Quarterly e-zine and Black Hair Press Anthology Year 4. And she has two poems for us. Take it away, Amelia.
Thank you, Miguel. I do have two poems tonight. Excuse me. The first one that I'm going to read is titled Fever Awakening. I have to get back there, no matter the cost. I'm better now, but the fever still burns internally. Everyone is glad that I'm well again and have returned home, but a part of me aches for the eternal sterility of endless day in the hospital. The quiet nights that are never purely dark or wholly silent. The numbness of fever which simultaneously soothes you to sleep and causes fitful dreams. In those dreams, I have visited places beyond imagining. As my body's temperature soars, my spirit takes flight. Propelled upward by the heat of my physical form, I am detached from this gravitational world. Prisms of light become tangible entities with souls that dazzle the spaces between atoms. Blue is a sinister being whose object of existence is to pierce the mind with regret. While yellow, the playful sprite, infects the heart with pure joy, even in the darkest corners of earth. Green meanders through the spectrum, invisible yet distinctly noticed if absent. But the one that my soul calls out to even now is a hue which has never been seen before. As deep a scarlet as the blood of my veins, and as rich a violet as the last streaks of dusk. More textured than the velvety black of a panther's fur, with the brilliance of a Caribbean aquamarine after an unsettling hurricane. This is my color. It does not have a name, and it only exists in the fever dreams of illness. It is my completion, my everything, the pinnacle of my existence, and it has been brutally murdered. The deadly combination of white blood cells and drugs have pitted themselves against me, against us. These microscopic soldiers marched into my dreams like a Roman legion, driving out fair yellow, wicked blue, and docile green with spear and javelin. But my color did not flee, and stood by me until its gruesome end. When dashed to particles, it ceased to exist, as the temperature dropped, and my spirit with it. My spirit slammed back into the prison of my physical form, and I wept at the harsh, dull light received by my opening eyes. The needles were drawn forth from my skin, and the once comforting machinery silenced. Everyone is glad that I am well again and have returned home. I'm better now, but the fever still burns internally. I have to get back there, no matter the cost. Thank you. Did you want me to read the second one before questions? Do you want to do specific questions between?
I can't hold back my
Go ahead.
questions. I have to ask a question about this.
Go ahead.
Um, I I love the idea of synesthesia. I've been poems with that. You created spiritual synesthesia, which I've never seen before with your blue, yellow, green entities, and the one undefinable hue that can only be captured in a fever. And this was a jaw-dropping poem for me. I looked at this and I went, what?
Thank you.
So would you tell us your inspiration for this poem?
Um, Man, I wrote it a while ago, so I'm trying to even remember what my headspace was. Um,
So it
I
wasn't
don't
the
know.
104-degree temperature.
Yeah, I've actually, and I've never had that, so because I don't think I've ever had like an illness that has been, that that bad. But just, I think thinking about, everybody talks about fever dreams and everything, but then you kind of don't, you're like, I don't know, I feel like a lot of people kind of dismiss them.
Right.
And I tried to think about it in terms of like, okay, what if I flipped it on its head and it was a fever dream that was almost more real of an experience than life itself. So somebody who woke up from it didn't want to go back to life and wanted to go back to the space of being in the fever dream.
Yeah, yeah, I can definitely see that. That's great. And there's this one line, I just want to pull it out. Prisons of light become tangible entities with souls that dazzle the spaces between atoms. I would like to point out that that line stands alone as a speculative poem. It's like a single line speculative poem sitting within the poem. So you create this rich condensate of evocation and imagery, and just how did this all come together?
It's funny when sometimes I honestly, I don't know because I feel like I get an idea and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I'll run with that. And sometimes I'll get ideas that I want to write because I'll write short stories too, but
Mm-hmm.
sometimes the idea itself is not a story. It's just kind of almost a scene or less than a scene. And so instead of playing around with writing as a story, I'll play around with writing it as a poem. Um, where this kind of worked out because it was just an idea. It didn't really have a story to it, if that makes sense. It was
Mm-hmm.
kind of just a nugget. And then, putting pen to paper or finger to keypad just kind of comes out. And sometimes I don't even know what's going to come out until I do it.
I get it. Well, thank you. So now you can read your next poem.
Sure. All right. This one is called The White Winter Tree. I remember my visit to the white winter tree, how it stood in the middle of the woods, like a poor sickly child amidst a bustling crowd. Its ghostly bark almost glowed in the summer sunlight, surrounded by full-bodied arboreal giants. I laid my hand on its trunk to feel a hibernating heartbeat, a promise of sleep, not death. I walked away from the white winter tree, only turning back once to capture its ghastly beauty in my mind. The next time I came to the white winter tree, the leaves of its brethren were afire. The crunch of the corpses of once green foliage hailed a song of rebirth for my pallid friend. I knelt to the roots of the white winter tree and observed with surprise how the frost seemed to liven the soil and rejuvenate its timber. Blue tendrils, not of death, but of life, curled up toward its branches. I dared hope as I departed this would not be goodbye. It wasn't until a quilt of soft snow embraced the forest that I again sojourned to the white winter tree, to a sight which captivated and enchanted me. The king of all its moribund counterparts stood lordly in splendor so rare. The snow on its branches was shamed by its pallor, and deep veins of turquoise gave it life. Delicate flowers of cobalt and opalescent ice blossomed precariously on the tip of each limb. I bowed to my regal comrade and gave silent gratitude for the reminder it held. Beauty and life can be found surrounded by death. Patience and perseverance can be victorious in the most hopeless of times. Loath as I was to walk away, I knew I could not stay forever. I captured the white winter tree in my heart to call upon its message in moments of darkness. When the fresh green sprouts of the forest at large began to show signs of renewal, I trudged through the mud to the white winter tree to assure myself it still stood. Its majesty had diminished, and the blooms melted to tears. Faint signs of those azure veins remained, but I did not despair. I knew the persistence of that white winter tree and the promise of what it could be. I only had to wait yet 3 seasons more, ere winter returned for its king.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Okay, so you gave us a story of a king in slumber who awakens every winter, and it very much reminded me of a short story. So it was that. Did it start as a short story and it became a poem, or what did it start as a poem?
That one was definitely a poem. I feel like there's a lot of times that um, if it's an idea that, like I said, I can't turn into a story, then it becomes a poem. But some ideas, this one in particular, instead of starting as a story, I could see the imagery in my head. And um, I dabble a little bit in art and drawing myself, but
Mhm.
again, I dabble, and at least in my mind, I couldn't, I don't feel like I have the talent or the ability to bring that forth in visual art form. So this was kind of the best way that I could do it, if that makes sense.
That definitely makes sense to me. And I'm a visual artist, and for me, lines like the snow on its branches was shamed by its pallor, deep veins of turquoise gave it life, delicate flowers of cobalt opalescent ice blossom precariously on the tip of each limb. See, for me, that's like this exquisite imagery that you may not paint, but you're painting with words, and that really
Mhm.
worked for me. It added magical qualities to the tree. Was there some particular reason? I mean, I could see this going in a lot of different directions, but you particularly landed upon a certain color and rhythm in that stanza. Was there?
Mhm.
Is it was an affinity toward like the cool blue part of the colors, or how did that work?
Yeah, I think trying to pick out something that definitely stands out from other natural trees. And
Mhm.
again, kind of like with the other poem, The Fever Awakening, when it came to this, I took an idea that's natural, normal, we're all used to. We're used to the trees blossoming in the spring and then dying off in the winter and then, or excuse me, turning colors in the fall, dying off in the winter just to come back. But trying to take that idea and flip it on its head of, okay, what if there was a tree that did the opposite, that it bloomed, that it came to life in the wintertime, and it would be the opposite of the other trees where you've got greens and browns and orange and red, but the colors that almost none of those trees have are, the white, the blues. I could have even, looking at this now too, I could have thrown in some purples and it would have been, it would have tied in with the theme of just taking an idea that we're all used to and flipping it on its head and presenting the antithesis of it.
Yeah, and you did that very well. Thank you. That was great. I also pulled out of it because we associate blue veins and things like that, or bluish tinge with death.
Yeah.
The fact that instead of being dead, this creature, this king of trees, is alive is really powerful. Right?
Mhm.
It just because it's the season of death doesn't mean that there isn't going to be renewal. I think that's really fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. We have one more poet who will not be able to show up, and because she lives in Australia, and so of the timing, until a little after 10. So what I hoped was that we could have a conversation about speculative poetry and the kind of work that we do, and just engage in a conversation. So let me minimize this here. Since I'm already talking with you, Amelia. So what brought you into speculative poetry? Was it just the thematically this happened to work for this particular poem, or is it something that you really are those themes really work for you?
Definitely the themes work for me when it comes to poetry. I've written a little bit of poetry here and there ever since like grade school. And I enjoy it. And actually my great grandfather was a published poet. And it wasn't until recently that I kind of discovered the idea of, oh, well, poetry doesn't have to be what we think of classically. You could take the speculative element and it doesn't have to just stick to short story or prose form or novels. You
Mhm.
can apply it to poetry too, and kind of playing around with that idea was fun. So I think I usually write a little more towards the actual short story prose aspect of things, but every once in a while, again, I'll get like a nugget that just it fits better as a poem. So
That makes sense. Yeah, I would absolutely agree. And for me, the same type of thing. So what about LindaAnn? How did you get into speculative poetry?
Well, Miguel, every time you write a persona poem, even though it doesn't sound speculative, you're playing with the speculative realm because that person is no longer alive and you are not that person. So I have, for example, a suicide collection that I'm working on that's the sequel to my first one. And I took a lot of people's suicide notes and created erasure poetry. And I took lines from their work that they had published or court documents and so forth and created things. So inherently, even if it's not on Mars or about witches or cryptids, those are all speculative because I'm not those people and those people are deceased. And it's very interesting to play with persona. So I think that's the back door that I entered it through because I had been writing these dramatic monologues, not realizing to myself, oh, this has a label
Right.
beyond persona poem or dramatic monologue. But in fact, they aren't inherently speculative. And I was drawn to some of those magazines starting in 2017, even though I had my first poem published in a school magazine when I was 9 years old, the same year that I had my play on stage. So I started very young, but I actually started before then writing complaint letters for my
Oh.
parents when I was 7 and 8 years old. And I always got paid, not for my parents, but we would get refunds, coupons, uh, more merchandise. And I said to myself, well, look at that. Writing is well paid.
That is an interesting way to get into writing.
Right? At seven
Wow.
years old. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Because
And yeah,
people don't know who's behind the pen. They don't know that this is a 7 or 8 year old child who knows how to type.
yeah, absolutely. No, they don't know that.
Yeah.
And
So
did you find that uh, did you find there was I mean, not a number of people in speculative poetry found this, that there's a kind of a dismissive tendency towards speculative poetry by some literary poetry magazines. I
definitely,
I don't know where this is coming from though.
considered genre. I think it comes from what my friend calls the MFA mafia.
Oh God. Now I'm going to have that stuck in my head.
Great way to put it, right? Right.
Yeah.
These are the people who teach young people how to read poetry that no one will ever want to read.
Hmm.
It would be the equivalent of you have ballet performances that are only attended by ballet dancers. Let's niche it down. And I don't want to name the names of the publishers who have trafficked in such experimental poetry that I can't even understand it. I'll tell you. I read these poems and I say, what made an editor say out of all the 300, 400, 500 poems that they got, this one, I have to publish this one. I look at it's like, it's not interesting. I've had so many people review my books who start the review by saying, normally I don't understand or read poetry, but I write narrative poetry, which is storytelling, and
Right.
everybody can understand, right? Persona poems, which everybody can understand because they're dramatic monologues. I'm not trying to traffic in poems that only 3 people in the world who went to Yale can understand.
So you don't want to write a poem that's a white painting.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think genre poems, by their very nature, are more understandable than what we consider literary with the quotes, right?
So in some ways, they're almost closer to folk poems. I mean, because people can connect to them.
People can connect to them. People can connect
Interesting.
to them. And I have done quite an unusual thing. Every time I serve jury duty, there's always lulls. And I get up in front of the mic and I recite long narrative poems because I went to Catholic school and we had to recite long narrative poems in front of the class with no notes, committed to memory, and they're there forever. You know, they're my luggage,
Wow.
my head, and everyone in the jury room would say, "Can we have another poem? Can I hear this poem again?" And then
Wow.
the last poem I would read on our last day, I would write in heroic couplets a chronicle of what the jurors had gone through. Now,
Mhm.
this is a federal offense. You're not supposed to write these things, so this is very disruptive. And they're never published, they're never shared. But I would get asked to recite that poem 5, 6 times so people could film it. So when they say, you know, people don't like poetry, they have to be introduced to it in the right way. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and what was I memorizing? I'm memorizing long narrative poems. You don't find long narrative poems being published anymore, except in magazines like Long Poem Magazine, which comes out of the UK. Because even with the bandwidth that you assume is endless, you know, you have an online journal, it should be,
Right.
you know, you still will find guidelines that say
Right.
30 lines maximum,
Right.
40 lines maximum. I just
Although
have,
mine's a lot longer than that.
right.
Luckily.
Right, right. But people still want to crimp you and
Yeah.
you a line count. And, you know, narrative poems, of course, take more space
Yes.
than a sonnet, you know. I mean, this is, I believe this is narrative in its way. The poem I read, even though it's only 11 lines, I think you
Mhm.
get a feeling of what's happening. So it's a little story. Right? Would you
Sure.
agree?
Sorry.
I said, would you agree?
Yes, I would agree. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
No, that's one of the reasons I was balancing between the 499 lines and or above, and so it ended up being there because I had to figure out. Really, it was about how much time do I have to be able to properly and fairly review the poem. I did not want to um, feel like I was rushing through a poem. So if I got 100 poems that were above 499 lines, and then a whole bunch of other poems that were short, I don't think I would have been fair to the long poems, and I didn't want to do that. So I cut it off there. It's an arbitrary cutoff, obviously, but that's why I did that.
How many poems are you receiving for SpecPoVerse generally?
Right now, I have over 150 for an issue. So yeah, it's been very well received. But I think also because there's a lot of e-verse, excuse me, e-zine and the print magazines, which are in hiatus or they just shut down.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
so now I want to ask, thank you so much. I want to ask Koa, what do you think about how you got into speculative poetry? And is that a big part of the poetry that you write, or is it a minor part?
Right, right. So, growing up, yes, I was exposed to a lot of fairy tales in Vietnam. That was the age before the smartphones, yes, in the 90s and the early 2000s. What we usually played around with was the adults would usually tell children stories, yeah, fairy tales, folklore, and all of those would always contain elements of magic. Yeah. The good versus evil, yeah, the heroes versus the monsters, and always good triumphs over evil. And they always featured elements of magic and talking animals and even, yeah, some sort of benevolent entities where they personified the rivers and the mountains. So I fell in love with those elements very early on, and I suppose I unconsciously felt drawn towards the supernatural elements when I started writing. I haven't been writing for long. I actually started writing in 2018. Right. So when I started writing, I felt that those elements made me feel comfortable. Yeah, instead of the real world, there are lots of poets and writers in Vietnam who already deal with the real world. So I'm not very good at that. So I returned to some of the supernatural things, the more interesting things for me personally. And in the end, I suppose I stuck with that. Right. So the speculative elements define most of my writings. Yes. I also write narrative poetry as well. I like to tell stories. I like to write in things that have a clearly defined structure because it is my hobby and also my interest. And besides speculative poetry, I also write mainstream poetry sometimes, right? Poetry that does not have any ghosts or flying machines or time travel in them. So, but most of those writings fall into the short poems like haiku, which I also submit to other competitions and magazines. Right. But for most of my writing, well, I suppose career is too big of a word right now. Well, for most of my writing interests, I stick to the speculative mostly.
Very good.
Yeah.
So my next question, I guess I'll start with you, is so what have been your influences in terms of other poets who've influenced you and describe how they've influenced you?
Right. So growing up, I actually do not have any clear influences from anyone in my family because my family does not have any poets as far as I can tell. And the ones that were poets, are no longer with me or with us, yes, as we can say. So growing up, everything I learned about poetry, I learned from schools, and let's just say I was terrible at this literature subject at school because usually we had to understand or interpret a poem from someone living in a very distant past, someone in the feudal era, someone from the Tang dynasty in China. We had to interpret the poem in a very specific ways that the teachers wanted us to interpret. And I suppose that made me feel a little bit, just like bored with the ways the poetry was written and interpreted. So when I grew up, I just started looking around the internet when the internet finally came to our family. So I poked around the internet a little bit and I discovered poets around the world. Like, of course, we all know Edgar Allan Poe, right? We all know, yes, H.P. Lovecraft. So I started with the big names, yes, the names that usually popped up when we talked about horror poetry, when we talked about ghosts or supernatural. And then I started branching out. And now I'm looking for more modern. That's why one of the reasons I write to magazines is because they offered, the payment is good, but the thing I really want is the free issue the complimentary issue that they give the contributors. That's why I can explore more, I can learn more about the poetries of the poets of the modern era. And I am very interested in reading some of them. Right. I remembered I really admired the writings of Mary Soon Lee. Yes, she's a very big name, yes. And I also enjoy reading the haiku-like narrative poems of Christina Seng, I suppose. Right, and I also like the more traditional writings of some of the friends on Facebook that I've made, like Scott J. Couturier. He's also a very great writer and a very good speaker, I suppose. Right. And more I discovered more of the speculative poetry and I'm starting to branch out. I first started writing mainly in rhymes and meters because I was comfortable with that. But now I'm testing out different styles. I'm writing in blank verse, I'm writing in free verse, I'm writing in other styles. That's interesting to me.
That's great. I
Yeah.
actually forced myself when I first started writing speculative poetry to not write in iambic pentameter. I said, you can do this once every 6 months, but that's it. I said,
Yeah.
otherwise you're off of it. I thought it was a very important way for me to branch out, and it worked. But it was very
Yeah.
fun. First I cried over it, and like, no, I want to. It's like, no, stop.
Yeah. That's not you self-hypnotize yourself into getting out of your comfort zone.
That's right.
I'm trying to do that as well. Yes.
Absolutely.
Sometimes. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
Amelia, what about you? What what kind of influences have drew you into poetry or affect how you write your poetry?
Definitely poets that use a lot of imagery. I know um, Edgar Allan Poe was mentioned. He's definitely a big one. Robert Frost, Robert Browning. Um, and also, like I had mentioned before, my great grandfather is a published poet. I think he has two compilations that are published. And growing up, we had a couple of copies just because, passed down through the family. And that was
Mhm.
pretty cool to have, a family member with some published poetry. So I always loved reading his poems and looking through stuff. So.
That's great. Was there any particular kind of poetry um, that was particularly attractive, any particular form?
I don't think so. I think any poem that tells a story that you can see. Like I said, I'm really drawn to the imagery and just the poems that, they paint a picture so easily that you don't have to work for it. Like the
Right.
poet has done all the work for you and you just have to read it and it manifests itself in your brain and your imagination very easily.
You don't like poetic obfuscation?
Not if I'm tired. Like I said, I have 6 kids. I don't have time for that.
which leads right to LindaAnn. So LindaAnn, so who have been some of your poetic influences?
Well, because I went to a Catholic school that made us memorize and recite, I also looked for certain influences. Hawthorne, very different, has a very different rhythm from, say, the poetry of Thomas Hardy. But there's a musicality in the short stories of Hawthorne as well. And Hardy is, of course, very, very sad and, you know, uses interesting words like plow down a tombstone, how tears plow down a tombstone, that made me so alive to the written word from when I was a child. And of course, this is way before the internet. We would go on the subway and try to memorize as many of the songs as we could. So we would sing the songs on the subway coming home. So the idea of memorization of words that other people have written makes it stick with you a lot longer.
Mhm.
A lot longer. I can
Absolutely.
still hear those songs, and to get up in front of the jurors and recite long poems like Hiawatha, or even a playful one like The Jabberwock by Lewis Carroll, which is a great poem to perform in front of a jury room when you have the mic and a captive audience and everybody is so warm and loving it. It just revs you up to want to memorize more poems. Poe doesn't, Poe has a sort of deliberate monotony, which doesn't play that well in a jury room.
Mhm.
Yeah,
It's monotonous enough.
yeah, yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
But yeah, and I will not divorce myself from iambic pentameter, even if they burn me at the stake. And the poem you published is Iambic Pentameter.
Yes, and that's great. I mean, I think it's wonderful. It just for me, I had to break out of it. I was too stuck on that form. Um, but yeah, I oddly, because I went to a school which required us to learn Latin, and in the early days required both Latin and classic Greek. One of my first exposures was Homer's Aeneid in Latin.
Mhm.
So I learned the poem, and it wasn't just translation. You had to stand up, you had to recite it.
Yes.
So you actually got to hear it, and it was really beautiful. And it's a lot more beautiful than when you translate it, which is just painful.
I agree. I agree.
And I also was very into Shakespeare's sonnets, so that's where the iambic pentameter thing. So so I was very into that, and then I got into other people's work, and um, Maya Angelou and Langston Hughes and a lot of the modern poets. And then I started to branch out and started realizing that wow, there's so many different kinds of poetry out there. And it was really great. But interestingly enough, I discovered that, and I think it's really unfortunate for students in the K through 12 system in America, is very rigid when it comes to the type of poetry that will teach you.
Ah, ah.
And they don't really like a lot of this. So we're not going to show you jazz poetry. That's just crazy stuff. It's like, wait a minute, jazz poetry has been acceptable for 50 years. What over 70 years now. It's like, but that's what happens. You get people stuck in a rut in the way they want to present things to students. And then the students think that this is the only way to write poetry. And then they think that, well, that's not the way I want to express myself. And then realize there's so many different ways to write poetry.
So many different,
So,
so many different ways. Yeah.
so many, yes.
Are you doing any golden shovels?
I am. I am. I actually have one. I would call it a modified version because I keep looking up the definition, and every time I see someone's golden shovel poems, I realize that they're not really sticking to the strict definition because the line that they are creating is not often a line from another person's poem.
Oh, dear.
That's the original definition.
That's the original definition.
But now what I have what one of my friends called a free shovel because the last line is just a line I made up that connects all the other lines in the poem.
Shovel. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, and I've published those. That one of them is in Cerealia, and I have others that have been published. But yeah, I seem to enjoy doing that. It's fun. It's a fun way to go, and I like villanelles and there's so many different forms. The harder the form is, the more I want to play with it
Yes.
and see what I can do to make it convey a certain feeling, a certain rhythm, a certain. I want it to be pulse pounding.
Yes.
I want the person to really, and that's why when I read people do that really well, it makes me happy. I always feel that if a poet submits something, if you're going to name the form, don't name the form unless you actually know how to convey the form.
Yes.
It's like because then it's all like I'm looking for the form. It's like nope, you didn't do it. That's not a good thing. Just don't even say you did it. It's like no, I don't know what this is. I just wrote this poem.
Thanks for introducing me to the free shovel. Thanks
Free
for
shovel.
yeah.
It's fun.
In my werewolf collection, which I'm still working on, because a werewolf obviously is a shapeshifter.
Right.
I have brought in so many forms to the book. I have mesostitch acrostics, echo verse, something I call the sonnet supreme, which is a Petrarchan sonnet with an extra finishing line. That's an epigram, a form that I created. Glosses. Oh, here's Eugen.
Here's Eugen.
She's here. Okay.
Hi.
Let me see the mic. Thank you.
Okay.
Hello. Hi.
Hello.
Everybody.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
So great. Well, let me introduce you to everyone. Okay. So, Eugen is an African-Australian author. She's a Nebula British Fantasy and Forward Indies Award winner, a twice World Fantasy Award finalist, and a finalist in the Shirley Jackson, Philip K. Dick Award, and the NOMO Awards for Speculative Fiction by Africans. And now I think we have to list some more awards for you, too. They're very recent. Eugen is an otherwise fellow, and it was also announced in the honor list for doing exciting work in gender and speculative fiction. Dang Black Thing made the otherwise award honor list as a sharp collection of Afro-Surrealist work. And visit her at eugenbacon.com. She's published this poem, Mometum Vitae, with Dominique Hecq, who's a widely anthologized and award-winning poet, fiction writer, essayist, and translator. Dominique lives and works in Wurundjeri land in Melbourne, Australia. I do not know if I pronounced that correctly. Hecq writes in English and French. Her creative works comprise a novel, 6 collections of short stories, and 70 books of poetry. Autopos is her latest publication. Among other honors, Hecq is the recipient of the James Tate Poetry Prize. And Eugen, you may read your poem.
Thank you very much. I speak to you from the land of the First Peoples, and it was never ceded in Melbourne. This poem, Mometum Vitae, was written in collaboration with Dominique Hecq, who, as we speak, is in Europe at the moment. So Dominique for us. Mometum Vitae. I own a shrunken humanoid head from Ecuador, a human skin tattooed with a male bust, bearing a flower stem and a memento mori brooch containing a graveyard scene made from female hair and a skull inscribed in French with phrenological markings. One half shows the head according to the system of Franz Joseph Goll, the other half according to that of his colleague Johann Caspar Spazheim. This I bequeath to my literary executor, along with my library, filing cabinet, wooden hand with brass wristplate and leather glove, as well as the woodcut illustration of an artificial hand from Amboise Pare that adorns my coffin-shaped desk. I wish to be catered to the microgravity crematorium in my desk. Do not remove the diagnostic dolls hidden in the secret drawer. In times gone by, women patients used this to indicate areas of affliction to their doctors, and are therefore of critical import to the experimental DMS I am compiling for use in orbit. You slip a hand between graveyard scenes. Last night, a skull. This morning, skin. Fine distinctions of death assemble in a phrenology of flower and stem inscribed with female hair from headstones whose names you never learn. Yours is a tale of harp and string, bequeathed with an illustration that thins towards invisibility, yet never fades. Brass cup, coffee, coffin, cream, doll drawer dress, drift drop drum, glove, grave, leather, plate, secret, time, wood, wrist. Note, critical import, en route to orbit. I am a scuffle of light in the firmament, looking through the porthole in the blackened sky. Each night flickers and poses. We are masters of time, immersed in small tragedies. Time wobbles. Perhaps one day we'll look out of the spacecraft and say, we've been together long, too long. Perhaps that day was yesterday. Perhaps it is tomorrow. The way we dance on holy days, calling the gods to come close. Millennia without a sign from deities on planet Earth or the moon. Yearn to know about other galaxies?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I have some questions for you. Let's see. So I did it for everybody. um, so a phrenology of flower and stem inscribed with female hair from headstones whose names you never learn. Your poem, it shifts from the concrete to the surreal and back, from the colonial theft of cultural artifacts to a spaceborne future. So I would be the loss to describe the oceanic breadth of themes. So would you describe how you and Dominique collaborated on this project?
Yes, so Dominique, in fact, Dominique and I have a history. So Dominique was first my PhD supervisor.
Oh, wow.
And so first she was my teacher and my mentor. And then as we progressed, she became somebody really close to me. And we have collaborated in a collection of prose poems, which is sort of like a call and response. And so when I saw the call for submissions, I said to Dominique, would you like to experiment with me? And the way we work together is really in that call and response. One of us either begins something and then the other responds to it and then the other looks at it. And so we wanted to write something really dark, but something that is also that speaks to social injustice and especially the things that happen to women. And so when you think of people like Franz Joseph Gould and Johann Gaspar Spazin and Ambroise Paré in France. These are people who experimented on women in many different ways. And that's why you have the women who, they have little objects to remind them of the pain and torture they've gone through. So I can't even remember who started the poem. I think I started with a name. I really liked Mometum Vitae. And then maybe I started with I own a shrunken humanoid head from Ecuador. And then Dominic just picked it up and somehow we just bounced across against each other. And that's how it came. And that's why you have the blend of the abstract and the concrete, but also it reads as if it's something written in one voice because we're both very immersive writers and we feel each other. Yeah, so we write and we feel the text and immediately the next bit just comes in and continues as if it was written by the self.
Yes, it definitely comes together as a unified whole. Absolutely. Now I've read many of your collections. So, and I know that you have a term which you use called irrealism.
Yes.
Would you describe that to the audience?
Yes, so a realism is like the strange beyond the beyond. And it's the literary strange in a way, you could think of it that way. But it's writing in such a convincing way that you bring the reader with you along the journey, and even you, that for a moment you suspend all belief, and it doesn't matter whether the walls are bending. Even when every atom in your head is telling you that walls don't bend, but in that particular scenario, you will bend with the walls and you'll become the wall. And so that's Afro-Irealism is something which I also work with when I write Black people stories, where I hero Black people. And I write stories where I can use all these capabilities of the Ireal, where as a storyteller, you become so immersed in that particular impossible world. Everything in your head tells you this is impossible, it couldn't happen, but you're so immersed in the story and the reader is so immersed in the story, they don't really care that it couldn't happen because it is happening right now in the story. And it's a very safe way to write. It offers a safe space to interrogate really difficult themes. And so things like torture to women, or things like rape, things like murder, things like racial injustice, you can write them in an Afro-Ireal or an Ireal way in such a manner that it is safe for the reader to inhabit that space and feel part of that space and share that story without feeling too confronted by it. But then they don't realize that you're being a subversive activism because you're addressing all these things, but behind a mask. Yeah, so it's almost like I'm wearing a mask when I'm writing the Afro-Ireal story. Yeah, so you enter it and you have no idea what you're entering into. Like whatever you encounter, that's it. And it's real in that moment in time.
I never thought about that as in terms of a way of making it safe to discuss the traumatic.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting. That's wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's sort of like it's a shield, adding that layer, a shield between you and the story and the reader. And so it takes them into this world, and it almost feels that this could never happen to me. This is so out there because it's so unrealistic, but then it's so real in itself because the characters feel they live and they breathe and they go through all these scenarios, but behind that shield of the unreal.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Miguel.
12:30 tomorrow is the next part of the SpecPoVerse inaugural poetry readings, 12:30 p.m. EST, Eastern Standard Time. And again, I want to thank everyone for reading their wonderful poems, for being part of our inaugural issue. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
See you. Bye.
Bye.